We'll be going back to Noah Petro, and we will be going on to the topic revisiting the Surveyor VII lander, understanding the effects of extended exposure to the lunar environment, and determining the age of Tycho.
Great, thanks so much. And I wanted to acknowledge some of the help that I got from Heather Meyer. After the abstracts were released, Heather contacted me. We began a discussion, and so her influence is felt deeply in this presentation. Next slide, please. So, Amy, I think it was earlier on this session today, mentioned, hey, what can we do in preparation for Artemis? I would argue going to visit hardware that's been exposed to the lunar environment for at some point it's going to be 50, almost 60 years by the time this mission might even happen, will give us a point to prepare for extended duration stays on the lunar surface. Now, obviously, we've sampled material from Surveyor 3. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. We have a sense of what happens on the surface of the moon. Of course, the LROC images shows us that the landers are still there, the flags are still flying, so we have a certain sense of what happens. But by actually visiting a site, and we know exactly where Surveyor 7 is, so we want to land not on top of it, but nearby and rove. Take Emerson's rover and visit Surveyor 7. Next slide, please. Now, there are a number of science objectives. One is understanding the lunar environment. What happens to hardware exposed over 50 years? And so this becomes a long duration exposure experiment, again, somewhat similar, although on a different timescale to what was performed by Apollo 12. Also, I would argue that, by sending a geochronology experiment to understand the age of Tycho gives us a really nice connection to Apollo 17. We think that there's Tycho material that was ejected to Apollo 17. Also, there's the thought that we may be visiting Tycho ray material at some locations at the South Pole. So understanding the age of that event to tie the geology of multiple landing sites together, I think is a unique capability. And then finally, looking at the regolith development at a lunar site, we get this natural experiment by roving through the blast zone. Tim just talked about the blast zones that we would be visiting, going from CLPS blast zone, undisturbed Tycho ejecta, Surveyor 7 blast zone. Gives us 3 points of comparison for regolith development. And this was really where Heather's interest, I think, kicked in, was understanding the development of fine scale regolith textures, melt draping on particulates, and understanding regolith development through multiple processes. And so I think the science justification for such a mission is there not only to understand regolith development, but also, again, what happens to hardware that's been sitting on the surface for multiple decades. Next slide, please. Again, required capabilities. I think, again, a rover that can go from a lander through undisturbed Tycho regolith to the Surveyor 7 and get right up next to Surveyor 7 for imaging of micro craters is going to be important. This is a figure from Ryan's paper from several years ago outlining the blast zone around Surveyor 7. So again, that blast zone gives us another data point for regolith development from the 1960s to present. Next slide, please. Obviously, if we want to do any kind of in situ geochemistry and geochronology, we need to be able to ingest samples, and then microimaging and macro scale imaging of the regolith properties at micro scales, but also microimaging of the Surveyor hardware. Surveyor 3 returned with very little modification. The hardware looked relatively new, but being able to identify microcraters that form and just the state of the hardware sitting on the surface after 50 years will be over 50 years will be something that would be very informative for long duration lunar exploration, which we hope to having as part of the Artemis program. I don't know that there's another slide, so I'll give you a minute and 10 seconds back of your schedule. Okay, enhancing capabilities, of course. Of course, we want to get the hardware back. Trimming off Surveyor hardware and returning it to Earth would be wonderful. And of course, deploying, anytime we talk about near side landing, deploying hardware, retroreflectors, anything that can be part of a larger scale geophysical network is obviously something that would be enhancing and build into a larger scale understanding of the lunar surface and interior. I think with that, I'll end here and give you 42 seconds of your conference back. Thank you.
Hey, Noah, thank you.